Hi, I'm Jessica, and I'm going to be reading Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne with you guys. Chapter 1, A Remarkable Discovery. I can remember the adventure as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. It began on the 24th of May, 1863. My uncle, Professor Liedenbrock, rushed into his little house on Königstrasse, one of the oldest streets in the oldest section of the city of Hamburg. He startled me and Martha, the housekeeper. On the way, he threw down his walking stick and hat and shouted, "Alex, come at once." Before I even had time to get to my feet, he shouted again. I rushed towards his study. Although Otto Liedenbrock was a good-hearted man, he was stern and made most people anxious. He was a mineralogy professor at the university in Hamburg. He was in awe of his own mind and abilities. He was known to be quite a scholar in his field. He had the genius of a true geologist. He could easily name and identify each of the elements known to man by their shape and appearance. The Liedenbrock name was respected in colleges worldwide for his many discoveries. The leaders in his field often sought for his advice. His goddaughter Gretchen, who was 18 years old, Martha, and I lived with him. As his nephew and an orphan, I was my uncle's laboratory assistant. I enjoyed the job since I liked geology and all related sciences. One could live happily enough in this little old house in spite of the restless impatience of its master. As excitable as he was, my uncle was very fond of me. But at this moment, this tall gentleman, who looked 10 years younger than his 50 years, was shouting for my attention. I reminded myself that there was no better way to deal with such impatience than swift obedience, so I rushed into his study at once. The study was like a museum, with every specimen in place and labeled. How often I could recall staying in his study to catalog the samples instead of going out to play with my friends. As I entered his study now, I saw my uncle sitting on his velvet chair holding a book that had his full attention. "Look at this remarkable book," he said. The book was faded and falling apart. "This is the Eimskringla of Snorre Turleson, the most famous Icelandic author of the 12th century. It is the chronicle of the Norwegian princes who ruled in Iceland. It is in the original Icelandic." "Oh," I said, without interest. "Is the type good?" "Type? This is not a printed book, you fool. This is a runic manuscript." "Runic?" I asked. "Runic characters were used in Iceland in the past," my uncle explained. I was just about to look at this wonderful book when a dirty piece of parchment slipped out of it and fell on the floor. "What's this?" my uncle cried, leaping to pick up the piece of paper. "These are runic letters. They're exactly like those in Snorre Turleson's manuscript. But what is their meaning?" He continued, "There is a secret in this message, Alex. I will discover the key. Sit there and write." I took a seat immediately and wrote as he directed. I did my best to write every letter of our alphabet that corresponded with each of the Icelandic characters. This was the result: MMRNLLSESRELEL. "This is a cryptogram, or puzzle," he said. "The letters are purposely mixed up. There may be some great discovery concealed here." Then my uncle carefully compared the book and the parchment. "These two writings were done by different people," he said. "The puzzle was done after the book. I know, since the first letter is a double M, a letter that is not to be found in Turleson's book. It was only added to the alphabet in the 14th century. There are 200 years between the manuscript and the document. I had to admit that this was a logical conclusion. I imagine," continued my uncle, "that the owner of this book wrote these mysterious letters. But who was the owner? Can we find his name in the manuscript?" My uncle carefully examined the blank pages of the book. On the second page he noticed a sort of stain. It looked like an ink blot. He thought that he could see some half-obliterated letters. With the help of his microscope he was able to read them. "Arne Sankt-Nusum," he cried happily. "That is the name of another Icelander, a genius of the 16th century, a celebrated alchemist. Perhaps Saknussemm hid news of some surprising invention in the puzzle? It must be so." My uncle's imagination took off at this thought. Neither of us will eat or sleep until I get to the secret of this document. Oh, I sighed at his latest plan. Saknussemm was a very well-informed man, but since he was not writing in his own mother tongue, my uncle continued, he probably used Latin, but it is Latin in disorder. Let's write the words vertically instead of horizontally. This might help us unscramble everything. Yes, I said absent-mindedly. My attention was now on the portrait of Gretchen. I loved her with all my heart, a fact my uncle was not yet aware of. I did as he suggested and wrote the letters, as it says below. Good, said my uncle, without reading them. Now write these words in a horizontal line. I obeyed. This was the result. Excellent, my uncle said, taking the paper out of my hands. This is beginning to look just like an ancient document. The vowels and the consonants are grouped together in equal disorder. There are even capital letters in the middle of words, just as in Saknussemm's parchment. I considered these remarks very clever. Now, said my uncle, I'll read the sentence. I think I've figured out a method for deciphering the code. And my uncle, to his great astonishment, read, I love you well, my own dear Gretchen. What's this? Cried my uncle. Aha! You are in love with Gretchen. Yes, no, I stammered. You love Gretchen, he said dreamily. Well, let us apply the process I have suggested to the document in question. He left the discussion of Gretchen for another time. Applying this formula, he dictated the following, as it says below. That's not it, cried my uncle, pounding his hand on the desk. There's no sense in it. He darted out and down the stairs. He rushed out the door and disappeared down the street. I wanted to tell Gretchen all about that had happened, but I didn't dare leave the house in case my uncle returned and needed me. So I began to catalog a new collection of rocks that we had just received. But this work did not keep me from thinking about that old document. I could not decipher it. I fanned myself with a bit of paper. As I did, I caught sight of the Latin words craterum, terrestre, and others. These hints gave me the first glimpse of the truth. I had discovered the key to the puzzle. I was filled with terror and overwhelmed. Could what I read really have been done? A mortal man was able to penetrate. No, it can't be, I declared. I can't let him read this. I was about to fling into the fire to destroy the secret, but the study door opened, and my uncle appeared. I put the document back on my table just in time. My uncle sat in his armchair, pen in hand, and began to try to solve the puzzle. He worked all night long. When I woke the next morning, that tireless worker was still at his post. I resolved to tell him nothing, because if he knew, nothing on earth could stop him. He would risk his life and stop at nothing to do what other geologists have never been able to achieve. But in the end, I changed my mind. My hunger overcame me, and I could wait no longer for a meal. My uncle was determined to fast until he achieved his purpose. Uncle, I said. Yes, he replied, as if just waking from a dream. The key to the document, I began, sighing. My uncle stared intensely at me over his spectacles. What exactly is it that you're trying to say? He asked. There, read that, I said, giving him the paper on which I had written. Read it backward. I had barely finished my sentence when my uncle broke out into a cry of joy. Aha, clever Saknussemm, he cried. He read the whole document from last letter to the first. When translated, this is what was written. Descend, bold traveler, into the crater of the Jokul of Sneffels, which the shadow of Skrtaris touches before the calends of July, and you will attain the center of the earth, which I have done. Arne Saknussemm. My uncle was joyous. He could not believe what he just read. He wanted to immediately spring into action. We will pack after dinner, he said.